Today, we're diving into a really fascinating story about a good deed, an undeniable miracle, really, that gets publicly branded as something evil. We're going to unpack the incredible response it sparked. This is the Beelzebul controversy.
But let's start with a question for you, one that feels just as sharp today as it did thousands of years ago. What do you do? How do you even respond when something genuinely good that you've done gets twisted and called evil?
It's a tough spot to be in, for sure. But, there's a story in the Gospel of Luke that gives us this incredible framework for handling exactly that. Let's see how it all plays out.
So our story kicks off with something truly remarkable, a clear, powerful act of healing that you'd think would make everyone celebrate. But instead, it lights the fuse for a really serious accusation.
Okay, so picture this. Jesus heals a man who couldn't speak, and the result is instant. It's undeniable. The man starts talking, and the crowd is just amazed. You can imagine the energy, the shock, the awe.
But that feeling of wonder, well, it doesn't last. Not for everyone, anyway. For some in the crowd, that amazement sours into a deep skepticism, and suspicion starts to bubble to the surface.
And then they drop this bombshell of a charge. Instead of seeing an act of God, they say he casts out demons by Beelzebul, the prince of demons. They're literally saying this act of healing and freedom is powered by the ultimate source of evil.
And let's be absolutely clear about this name, Beelzebul. This was a well-known name for Satan himself. So this isn't just some minor critique. They are accusing Jesus of being an agent for the most powerful, most evil spiritual force they could possibly imagine. It's the most serious charge you could make.
So how does Jesus respond to this? Does he get defensive, angry? Nope. He responds with pure razor-sharp logic. He just calmly starts to take their entire accusation apart, piece by piece.
He points out the massive, glaring hole in their argument with a simple, common-sense observation. He says, look, any kingdom that's fighting itself is going to collapse. So if Satan is fighting against Satan, how is his kingdom supposed to survive? It just makes no sense.
And with that one piece of logic, Jesus completely reframes the whole conflict. This isn't some kind of civil war in the kingdom of darkness. No, what you're seeing, he's saying, is a clash between two totally different, competing kingdoms. A kingdom that enslaves and a kingdom that sets people free.
Okay, so now that he's established this reality, that there are two kingdoms at war, Jesus makes it crystal clear where his power is coming from. He uses this incredible phrase. He says he does this by the finger of God. Now, this wasn't just a random expression. This was a direct callback to the story of the Exodus, where that phrase meant the unmistakable, direct power of God himself at work. So he's not just denying their charge, he's claiming his authority comes straight from the top.
And to really nail this point home, he tells this short, powerful little story. Imagine a strong man, he says, armed to the teeth, guarding his house. His stuff is safe. But then a stronger man comes along, attacks him, beats him, and takes all his stuff.
And here's the point of the whole parable. Jesus is identifying himself as that stronger man. This exorcism, it's not a sign that he's working with evil. It's an act of war against it. He's breaking down the door of the enemy's house to rescue the captives.
And then he draws this incredibly sharp line in the sand. In the spiritual war between these two kingdoms, there is no neutral territory. There's no middle ground. You're either with him, gathering for God's kingdom, or you're against him, scattering. The choice is that stark.
So after dismantling their accusation and declaring his own mission, Jesus then turns the tables. He puts the focus right back on his critics, calling them out for their spiritual blindness and their constant need for more proof.
Remember, some people in the crowd were demanding a sign from heaven. They wanted more proof. Jesus just calls this out as an evil generation and says the only sign they're going to get is the sign of Jonah.
And this is just a brilliant move. He brings up two groups of outsiders, non-Jews, as witnesses against them. Think about it. The people of Nineveh, they repented at the preaching of Jonah. The queen of the south, she traveled from the ends of the known world just to hear Solomon's wisdom. These people responded to so much less, and yet this generation is rejecting someone far, far greater who is standing right in front of them.
The message couldn't be more blunt. He is the sign. His words are the sign. His actions, like healing this man, are the sign. Something greater than a prophet and wiser than the wisest king is right here, and they are making a conscious choice not to see it.
And this all builds to his final point. He uses one last analogy, a powerful challenge about perception that really ties this whole encounter together.
Jesus says your eye is the lamp of your body. He's using our physical sight as a perfect metaphor for spiritual understanding, right? If your eye is healthy, if your perception is clear, then light comes in and you can see things as they really are.
So let's connect all the dots here. A huge sign, the healing of this man, happened right in front of their faces. The accusers saw the exact same event as everybody else, but their spiritual eye was bad, it was unhealthy. They looked at a clear act of light and called it darkness. So the problem was never a lack of evidence. The problem was a fundamental failure of perception.
And that's where this ancient story leaves us, with a choice that feels incredibly modern. When we see real power at work in the world, bringing goodness and freedom, do we have the clear eyes to see it for what it is? Or do we find ourselves on the sidelines, skeptical, just asking for yet another sign?